digital. Last year he gave a great talk, and so we invited him back to give another great talk. Are you going to do that for us? Okay, here you go.
What an act to follow, eh? Thanks very much, everyone. It's great seeing you all here for another round. So, at the last BigFive, we spoke about lessons from the trenches, and this time round we yet to talk about burning the rulebook. So, just a little bit on my background. My name's Bestbier. I'm CEO at a company called Realm Digital. We a tech consultancy. We've been around for about 25 years, really building all sorts of interesting tech, doing a lot of really exciting consulting projects. Some work that we worked on is Daily Maverick, design and built Daily Maverick. A lot of work in the e-commerce space with exclusive books and Computer Mania, doing a lot of virtual reality work. But we're really seeing in a very unique position, being able to see tech in all these different industries. We're working across from HR to retail to financial services, and that we see how this tech comes in and really just changes the world. And I think, with Jamie's talk and Zach's talk now, it's really created a really perfect introduction to what I'm here to chat about. I actually need a little clicker or something like that, or I'm going to have to... here we go, sorry. I was wondering how long I can talk about on this first slide with my face on here. But anyway, we're here to talk about burning the rulebook, and it's really about redefining, Africa through innovation. The angle of the talk is really about innovations can be critical to uplift South Africa. And, the one thing I thought about when Jamie was chatting here is, I think if Jamie had come initially and said, he's planning on building another payment solution, everyone, another payment solution, do we really need another payment solution? But there's a very unique South African, a very unique African problem that they saw the gap and created another payment solution that's solving a really big problem. And, without a doubt, they're going to be incredibly successful. So, really, I think burning the rulebook sounds a little bit anarchist, that someone's pick up a chair and throw a chair through the window or something like that. It's really not about forgetting everything that we've learned, or this just turfing out any form of regulation or having a rulebook. It's really about embracing innovation. I think it's creating this innovation mindset that we should be re-looking at problems that have been around for 100 years, because this new technology that's come in has made it easier to solve some of these problems, and really challenging outdated norms. I love the story about, I'm sure many of you have heard it, that a daughter goes to a family, mom's house for dinner, and she before she puts the chicken in the oven, she cuts the top of the chicken off, and she asks her mom, why are you doing it? And she doesn't know, so she phones her mother. Her mother says, my oven was very, very small, so I've always just cut the top of the chicken off to fit in the oven. And we see that a lot with how businesses are operating. They just keep on doing the same thing because that's how it's always been done. But tools like AI and that is just really speeding that up. Now, I promise this isn't going to be another talk on AI. But really, before we start talking about burning the rulebook, we've got to understand, Africa's mass market is, really glad to have you guys here, but this is probably like a really small, poor replication of like what the mass market looks like in South Africa. So, and really Africa as a whole. So just to talk a little bit more to that low-income majority. So 55% of South Africans live on less than 1,634 Rand per month. So, every time, I'm sure we've heard that many times, you read in these magazines and that, nuts. I was taking a look at my bank statement to see, what could I, tie to that. About, you're talking about, your levies payments, not even your municipality bill. It is nuts that, that's what a majority of the South African mass market's living on. we've got huge spending power. So even though the average monthly spend from each individual is quite low, 40% or 1 trillion annually is being spent in the mass market. So that money is sitting there, but how it gets spent is actually, through essential items. So we're not talking about, upgrading your internet or, getting another Netflix account. It's really about, sometimes you go to the retail store and there's some poor person in front of you and you can see they've kind of put the items through and now they've got to make a judgment call between purchasing some maize meal or buying some milk. And that's really the level that we're on in our country. So social grants are really essential. Some of these grants are going to people that might have disabilities and they can't work, or they're quite old and they can't work. There are also grants going to people that just can't find work and they just don't have the money to live. But 28 million South Africans are dependent on these social grants to get from day to day to be able to survive, which is also really just nuts. 1 in 6 South Africans work in the informal sector. So, a lot of people out there aren't, it's not in office jobs, they're not using their company internet or anything like that, they're working in the informal sector. And then something that's really interesting is the digital divide still exists. So this isn't accessibility or internet penetration, which is actually remarkably high. It's 75%. I think it's actually almost 80%. But the big problem right now is having access to the internet versus being able to afford to use the internet are two very different things. You're in a village and that village has access to mobile data, but you can't actually afford to use mobile data. Is pretty much worthless. The penetration doesn't really count for anything there. So that's really the state we're playing in, definitely in South Africa, but largely in Africa as a whole. We've seen some very kind of common patterns. The flip side to this is really innovation in Africa. And I think, one thing that South Africans, that we've seen in South Africa is it's a really innovative culture. I think we've spoken about it a couple of times today around, where does that come from? The innovation isn't really someone just struggling and, quietly going down. It's kind of like coming up with solutions to solve African problems or world problems. So some of this innovation we've seen, M-Pesa, I think M-Pesa has really been, any conference where we're talking about innovation in Africa, M-Pesa naturally comes up, and it really is the one of the shining stars of African innovation. And M-Pesa is really about mobile money. Really, really interesting. It's the largest mobile money platform in Africa, and it's all around being able to make payments, receive payments without having a bank account. And you'll see that as a common trend in what's happening in South Africa's unbanked population. Sweep South, our own baby down here. So obviously allowing you to be able to book a domestic worker. Really, really useful because obviously it kind of gives them access to the market, but also there's a lot of challenges around like the legislation of having domestic workers and things like that people aren't really sure of, and this actually allows these domestic workers to actually still be able to work for individuals on a kind of like ad hoc or permanent basis. Hello Tractor. So this was one I wasn't aware of, but it's really interesting. It's Uber for tractors, basically. So you've got a small holding or a little farm in some area, but you don't have a tractor. So either you can be manually working that land, or what you can do is you can actually rent a tractor for a period of time and actually get that sort of stuff done. And really, really incredible. And this is the type of innovation that I love. It's actually kind of remarkably simple, but it really just gets the job done and changes the course of some rural farmers. And then the final one here, which is a little bit closer to home for us, Realm Digital actually developed Snaplify, and we spun it off as a separate business a couple of years ago. But basically, Snaplify is a kind of an academic ecosystem now, but it really started out as a means to be able to provide digital textbooks to schools and universities. And, obviously, I'm a little bit closer to this one. So what was quite interesting was, if anyone can remember the textbook crisis in 2012, where, the government wasn't able to get textbooks to students and that. At that point, Snaplify was largely a magazine reader. We were doing the F&B Private Wealth magazine and the Woolies magazine, and we were making these sexy, interactive magazines where you could kind of watch videos in the magazine. And when the textbook crisis hit, it was just, a flashing red light saying, there's an opportunity here to be able to solve this problem. So immediately, the business pivoted in the direction of textbooks. We actually needed to go to a lot of really big magazine customers and say, unfortunately, we're not going to be doing this anymore. And, I think it speaks to, I think Zach made a point about, almost being able to understand which darlings you need to sacrifice. Don't hold on to these ideas that, this is my idea and you're going to go down with the ship. You've got to be prepared to say, time to pivot and do whatever you need to do. Anyway, got into the textbook market. And now Snaplify is the largest distributor of digital academic content in Africa. So they've got a whole bunch of other solutions. But where it was quite interesting is there's a lot of magazine readers, and you think about Kindles and things like that. What does it really make different? But last month I was actually in the UK with a meeting with a bunch of customers there, and we're talking about why is mobile money so big in Africa and in South Africa. And we said, well, one of the big reasons is crime. Your domestic worker comes to your house, you pay her, she gets on a taxi, and then the money gets taken from her. And the ability to kind of not be carrying money is, a big part of it is actually driven by, obviously, convenience is one of them, but crime is another. And there's a lot of challenges that we have in South Africa and in the African market that someone living in the UK or Europe or the States or whatever just cannot comprehend. Internet penetration, we're hitting kind of 80% roundabout now, but for years, internet just wasn't a thing in some rural area. So basically what Snaplify did there was they've got a branded device called a Snapbox, where you could actually sideload all the textbooks onto the Snapbox, mail the Snapbox up to the school would put it on their local network, and the kids could actually just go stand next to the Snapbox in the school and download the textbooks from there. And a lot of those sorts of challenges, the DRM we were chatting earlier, the DRM that is commonly used to protect textbooks. So, if someone steals your tablet, you can't download the PDFs of the textbooks on there. The DRM is largely Adobe DRM, which is reliant on an internet connection to be able to unlock that content. Again, it's something that just doesn't really translate to African problems. So really, a lot of these kind of challenges that we do have in Africa and South Africa, absolutely, it sucks to live with it, but it really creates some really unique opportunities for businesses to rise up and actually solve those problems as well. So what really needs to change here? So obviously, a lot of these have been touched on, but digital regulations need to change. We've got a lot of these old digital regulations that, you can't have a electronic signature here. There needs to be an ink signature, like these crazy ideas. Remote digital KYC, we've got to optimize those processes. It doesn't make sense for someone to be able to open a bank account instantly, but have to get into their car and actually go do a kind of a face-to-face KYC. Access to mobile payments, microloans. A lot, I'm flying through these because we've chatted a lot about these things today already, but it's very, very difficult to innovate if you can't get cash, and it's very, very difficult to get cash if no one's willing to give you the cash. They're talking about that fools, friends, and family, and that only goes so far before you're going to have to turn to banks. Internet access needs to be affordable. So I think there's been a lot of people crowing about the internet penetration in Africa and South Africa, and everyone's patting themselves on the back. But it doesn't really help if we aren't able to make that internet access affordable. Learning materials. If you think about a big leg up that we've all got to be where we are is having access to learning materials, having access to internet, being able to watch YouTube videos. Now, all of a sudden, every dad's a DIY dad that can put up a gutter system because I'm going to go YouTube how to sort these things out and that. And it's incredible that you take away that internet access, how you're really kind of crippling a person or a nation from actually being able to sort themselves out. And that final one there is inclusivity being front of mind. And I think that inclusivity, we often, depending on what industry you're in or what company you work at, you often kind of put inclusivity into, your little box that you relate to. But inclusivity can really be a whole bunch of things. So a couple of examples there's, does your loyalty system reward loyalty or people that can buy more of your stuff? So if you don't have a lot of money, but the moment you've got money, you would go buy that brand because you're loyal to that brand. Is that loyalty? Is the loyalty actually, how much you can actually buy? So, you think about the people that really need the benefits of things like e-bucks and stuff like that are generally the people at the very bottom. The e-bucks that many of us get, it's almost like, oh, free money, I'm going to go treat myself, whereas a lot of those benefits aren't actually getting to the lower, the mass market. Some of the other examples here, your free learning tools. Are your free learning tools and your free academic resources really educating Africa or educating the Africans that can have access to data? What's the point of kind of like create? And obviously, all with good intention, but the reality is it's not actually solving the problem. Does your bank allow any entrepreneur to quickly open a bank account? And you hear this, you hear it in the marketing material where, open a bank account in minutes, whatever, but you got to get in a car and quickly go do something in store. And then the final one, there's your finance website explaining your offering terms clearly, or only to those that speak English, understand complex financial terminology. So we do a lot of work with a lot of the financial institutions, but we're working on a Sanlam project. And what we often do, we call it the UX lab, is where we take digital interfaces and we take a test group made up of a whole bunch of different individuals from different parts of the market and we get them to almost run exercises, use cases through the interface. It can either be a kind of a clickable prototype or it will be the live version of the tool. And we had an African guy, older guy, and we got him to basically come onto the system. And I think he had to come on, he had to change the beneficiary, he had to go through a couple of steps and everything. And, afterwards we all excitedly said to him, kind of what do you think of the experience? And he, how did it make you feel? And he said it made him feel sad. And we're like, what the hell? We definitely don't want our system to make people feel sad. And we said to him, kind of like, where does that come from? And he said that the terminology that we're using, obviously the financial services industry is just rife, like insurance and all that is just rife with complex terminology. He said he read that stuff, he didn't understand what it meant, and it made him feel stupid. He felt, this isn't a safe space for him because, he just doesn't understand what's going on. So obviously we went back and we kind of changed it. AI is a great tool for that sort of stuff, take this and kind of like change the language and all that kind of stuff. But, when we talk about inclusivity, it's, do your customers or your potential customers, how inclusive kind of are these solutions that you build, and from the language that you're using to the actual business model that you've got. Does your business model, and I can tell you from a Realm Digital perspective, that I'd say about 80% of the tech that we build generally is aimed at people that have good internet connectivity, they're working off a decent monitor, it's someone that they've got, they can afford large amounts of data in that. And I don't think it comes with bad intention from our clients in that. I think everyone's trying to sort these problems out, but often it's just not being aware of, how inclusivity touches these different areas from kind of like the language you're using and things like that. So really just talking a little bit about what does Africa's digital future look like. So mobile first approach, we've heard it for years and years and years, but more and more as internet accessibility and internet penetration, the cost of data does come down and allows more people to do things. Mobile is going to become more and more of a dominant force. We already see it, but this is really going to be kind of, we're going to see more people doing different sorts of things, more education happening through mobile devices. Obviously, e-commerce is a big thing. Thrifting, so selling second-hand goods. Spas, spas shops using mobile apps and things like that are bubbling up. Being able to sell insurance to the spas industry through mobile apps. Increased fintech investments, obviously, as more of this mobile adoption is being seen. We're going to see more people investing in building more financial services technology, more mobile apps and things like that. Increased financial inclusion. So I think that the penny has dropped. Maybe I made it sound a little bit mopey around inclusivity, but I think it is important to put it on the radar. But there is definitely more of an angle of, how do we actually bring, the mass market into these ecosystems. But a huge part of the South African or the African mass market has skipped traditional banking completely. Or if they might have a bank account, I think the figure is 80% or just under 80% of the mass market will draw the full amount of money out of the bank account directly after it's being paid. So, if they work for an employer, the employer requires a bank account, they'll put the money in, and this person will go to an ATM, draw the money out, because the way that they actually, money's moving around in the informal sector is very, very different to what we're traditionally seeing. And it's actually incredible. It's a completely different world where, these individuals have kind of like ledgers in their head. They know who they've lent money to, who they can trust, who they can't trust. It's a completely informal sector banking kind of approach there. And then finally, the e-commerce explosion. So, this isn't going to be slowing down anytime soon as well, but over 500 million South Africans will be e-commerce users, 180 billion to Africa's GDP. So huge amount of money flowing in the e-commerce space, and I think that's really, that's really exciting as well. Obviously, especially when it exposes people that weren't able to sell their products on scale to now all of a sudden start climbing into that market a little bit more. And then the final one there is just tech-driven innovation. So AI, last point that I'll make on AI, but AI really is, there's been a lot of, is it going to be kind of, is it going to take away jobs, or, a lot of the things aren't as simple. If you've got a person that, maybe an elderly person that's kind of nearing retirement, and what their job at a financial institution is data capture. They've got pieces of kind of like documents, physical documents that they're capturing into some digital system. You can't simply go to them, it's time to pivot. They're at the point of their life where they're kind of like nearing retirement, and for them to make a move like that is actually just very, very complicated and difficult. But AI is going to massively, massively change the world. I think that, if no matter what industry you're in, if you're not kind of like dipping your toe in AI, understanding some fundamentals about AI, you're going to find yourself in trouble down the line. You also don't see opportunities as quickly as, how you can kind of make your work a little bit more efficient. And I think a good example of this is many, many years ago, about 6 years ago, we hired a developer, and this developer, if anyone knows about software developers, this developer, instead of using Control-C and Control-V for copying and pasting code, which is like a core fundamental part of your job, this developer was moving his mouse and highlighting and then copying and pasting in that. And we sat this guy down and said, shortcuts, you're going to have to use shortcuts, otherwise, unfortunately, you just can't work here anymore. And I think that AI, over time, what's going to happen is employers are going to start going to employees and saying, you have to use AI. And people might say, but I'm just not technically advanced in that. But it's a tool that makes you more efficient, or make you better, it will make you faster. And it really is a core thing that people shouldn't be afraid of. It's something that's going to kind of up your game, and it's going to be incredibly powerful. So we're going to see this tech-driven innovation bubbling up more and more, because, there hasn't been tech like AI that was very, very easy to adopt. I could go to someone like my mom and say, look, you ask a question, or you ask it to write a paragraph and that stuff, and spits it out. I couldn't go to my mom and explain like cloud computing, like there's AWS, it just wouldn't be the same conversation. So we're seeing very little barrier to entry for people to adopt AI when they're actually willing to embrace it. So yeah, really just my final kind of key takeaways here is that Africa's got huge untapped potential. There's massive, massive opportunities in that. I think a lot of people skip over Africa because there's this bit of a concept of, poor Africa, and if you want to make money, you got to go to Europe and the UK. A lot of those areas are very, very kind of tapped out and hard to work with. And also, we understand the challenges that Africa needs to solve. So there's a massive amount of opportunity here. Digital transformations here. A lot of the challenges that we couldn't really, or solutions that we couldn't really take into Africa is, there wasn't ability to get some rural village online to give them kind of textbooks and things like that. More and more this is changing. There needs to be some bold, rapid action. This isn't something that, in the kind of next kind of 7 to 10 years or whatever, we're going to slowly start changing policies and things like that. If you think about the damage that, for the first couple of years of internet in South Africa, you had to use telecom infrastructure. It was just, and if you think about the damage that did to Africa as a whole in terms of being able to get on board with e-commerce and all that sort of thing, you don't want to legislation and old regulations and things like that to hold us back from being able to really tap in. And then finally, we need inclusive growth for all. There's no one likes poor people, and it sounds terrible when I say that, but poor people don't like being poor, and countries don't want to support poor people. It's a if you think about these grants and things like that, it's really difficult in a country. And having inclusive growth for the top end or the wealthy people doesn't really help the country. What we've got to do is we've got to lift it up from the bottom and really just kind of spread those learnings and spread that, that growth and that better living standards and things like that. And that's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you. That was great. And I had just a couple quick questions. If anyone wants to ask a question, Realm Digital, you're a company that helps organizations adopt the latest technology. That's one way to describe you anyway, right? Yeah. What is the technology of 2025? And if it's AI, I'm going to ask you a different question.
Oh, I could give you a different answer just to dodge that, but I'd say it's going to be AI. I think AI is going to permeate everything, really.
Okay. Let me follow up on that in two ways. One is, what is the technology people aren't talking about that they should be talking about?
Technology that, maybe not technology, but the kind of data. So good data, we've been collecting data for years and years and years. Data is really a kind of a key thing to empower AI, if it's garbage in, garbage out. I think that more and more data needs to be discussed. It is discussed, but not in the kind of the right model. There's this idea of...
But isn't AI completely transforming the data conversation?
Well, personalization. You're talking about e-commerce and having kind of personalization. How do you get data out of your customer base? So we've seen some really interesting things around gamification. A project we did for one of the big financial services companies is we want to know when you retire, what are you really passionate about doing? So do you want to go buy a beach house? Do you want to buy a yacht? Do you want to leave it for your kids?
Those both sound awesome.
Both of those. And but if you give people a form, and one of the questions of the form is, what are you looking to do when you retire? People are, what the hell does that have to do with you? And they just don't fill that in. But if you create a little game where you can kind of create a picture board that there's a whole bunch of little
You
items,
trick people into answering the question. Okay.
I suppose we encourage them.
Put it however you like. That sounds like
exactly. And they're very willing to give that information. If you use that information in a good and responsible way that kind of solves problems for them, they're very keen. So gamification is something that, again, gamification in learning, gamification in financial services, and across the board is something.
I know gamification is the term for tricking people into answering questions. But okay, so. Back to AI. Now, I have a premise that not a lot of people say, which is that in a matter of time, AI will not, the term AI won't be used, it'll just be everything.
Yeah.
Do you agree, and when do you think that'll happen?
I think I think there were things like, I'm going to Google this instead of, I'm going to search for it in the terms that...
We've already agreed it's going to replace search.
Yeah. It's, absolutely. So I think that I think that, a lot of us are using AI every single day in so many ways that we're just not aware of and everything. I think that
That's actually been true for a very long time.
it has been absolutely, ad servers and all that sort of stuff. A lot of that is actually
Search itself.
search itself, 100%. So I think that, it's going to become more of a business tool, and I think it is a tool. I think it's, the point you get to where you're just almost using AI or, when AI started becoming the buzzword, we had a lot of clients knock our door saying, we need you to build us something with AI. And when they gave us the requirements, we're like, that's a pivot table. You need a pivot table there. You don't need AI. And I think that people need to see AI as a tool that solves specific problems.
They wanted to call it AI.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, probably, definitely, I'd say in the next year, to be honest with you, next year or two.
Okay, because my thinking is no one will say it's the AI for anything. It'll just be this, and you just assume AI is behind
Exactly.
it.
And I think there's going to be expectation of employers to, when we've got legal documentation, I would expect one of my staff members to take that legal documentation and feed it through AI to highlight the areas that we should kind of like give special attention to before they bring it to me. And more that I believe that is going to be an expectation from employers to expect employees to use AI as a powerful tool to make them better.
So at last year's conference, you had a set of AR glasses or whatever, VR headset.
VR headset.
And I know you guys are bullish on that technology. Talk about why that's an important technology, and is it being crowded out in the conversation by AI?
Yeah. So virtual reality, incredible bit of technology. We were having a talk earlier about how you build a AI tool, a really powerful AI tool that maybe takes your marketing emails and rewrites them in a really great way, and people will be, wow, that's really impressive. You take a virtual reality environment where you may be going to be kind of showing people around like a new house that they're going to be purchasing, and they are, wow, this is incredible technology. It's a very unique technology, but again, it's a tool, and I think that the risk with a lot of these tools is people build gimmicks with it, and it gives the tool a bit of a bad name, and that we're building virtual reality solutions for the mining industry, where those guys with those massive Komatsu vehicles are learning how to drive, and the rules for driving around a mine dump, military virtual reality solutions. So we're building a lot of virtual reality solutions.
Training is a huge application for it.
Training
that's dangerous,
Training
right?
is a huge application. There's a lot of being able to see if people are scared of heights in the construction industry and things like that. So it really is an incredible tool, but I think that very specific. I'd struggle to go to, certain industries and come and without feeling tacky, trying to force virtual reality solutions in there.
Last chance for a question. Okay. So what do you think we'll be talking about next year?
Oh, that's really
same vein that we've been talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of these
and
things.
If it's still AI, I'm just not going to do this conference anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it will be a lot of the same things. I think what hopefully a lot of what I was covering here around taking some of these awesome tools and awesome opportunities to the mass market, I think that would be really great. You're thinking about insurance products and things like that, being able to, using Jamie's tool, being able to sell insurance products to the taxi passengers and things like that, making payments. A lot of those things are popping up, and it's really, really great because it's getting it to the people that need it, if it's a good product, obviously.
All right. Please join me in thanking Simon.
Thanks very much.
That was great. Thank you.